Hello and welcome to this technique tutorial. My name is Samantha Wiltshire and I will be your tutor today. And today we're going to be talking about using negative space for construction. Now, if you are not sure what different types of construction options are available to us, I would recommend that you further explore our construction series on YouTube. And you may also want to watch the Introduction to Methods of Construction video as well. So today we will be running through our lesson objectives. We'll be discussing the equipment you'll need for today's activity. We will be going through what the negative space and envelope method is. Then we'll be having a practice together and concluding and going through some references and further activities. So the negative space method is really going to help us to see in some brand new ways as artists using that negative space. It's going to allow us to achieve more accurate proportion using that envelope. It's going to improve our overall realism in general, and it's going to help us to understand how to begin an artwork if we're not quite sure where to start. So for our activity today, you're going to need a printout of a simple animal reference image. I would highly recommend, especially for absolute beginners, using the Blue Jay picture that you'll find on my slides further down in this presentation. You'll need to have a light HB pencil, a hard and a soft eraser. Any drawing paper is fine today. It does not have to be high quality if you're just treating this as an experiment and a learning opportunity. And you'll also need a skewer, ruler, piece of string, or a knitting needle, and we're going to be using that tool to measure. So first of all, what is negative space? When I'm trying to see negative space, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the space occupied by the areas surrounding my subject matter. So that's going to really depend on what I decide that my subject matter is. If I am drawing this lovely vase, for example, on the right, when I decide that the vase itself is my subject, that makes everything around it negative space. If I focus on that negative space instead, I will see that there's actually the shape of a face on each side. And so when we turn our vase into our negative space and the area surrounding into our subject matter, we'll see the shape of those faces come through in this diagram. Another example might be if you had a tree and you were looking at the little pockets of sky poking through between the branches. We would consider those little pockets of sky to be our negative space in that instance. And so when we look at our negative space as well, and we combine considering that space with some measuring techniques on top of this, we can create far more accurate drawings. And we can think about the fact that if our negative space is incorrect, that will mean that our subject matter must also be incorrect in some way. So let's do an overview first of the envelope method. The envelope method is a process which breaks 3-dimension down into 2-dimensional forms. It's really easy to combine with other construction techniques and methods as well. And what we do is we construct with a consideration of this negative space when we use our envelope process. And this basically ensures that you'll fit your entire subject onto your page. One of the reasons it ensures that you'll fit your entire subject is because when we create a pocket around the entire subject, like here we have Ryder's illustration of a lady, and he's used an envelope. He's put her in this kind of slightly wonky kite shape, and he can actually draw that kite shape first before he starts her body. And that will ensure that he's not going to start maybe with a face with no guidelines and then end up having to chop off this foot which sticks out because he's run out of room. He's going to be able to ensure that every aspect of his person will fit in his page when he uses this as a starting point instead. And this is also just going to give you greater control over your composition in general. I want to put you in the driver's seat rather than having your subject matter kind of boss you around, because you're just starting it anywhere randomly on your page rather than thinking about your placement. And so what we need to do is we create the boundaries around our shape. And then you'll see that on Ryder's diagram, I've taken a highlighter tool and I've highlighted the areas around the body within that shape that then become our negative space. And I can pay attention to the shape of those to check that the shape of my figure is correct also. I'm also able to then come in with some diagonal lines, and I'm able to kind of chop diagonally, sometimes also horizontally or vertically through my figure in order to further break the body down into more manageable sections. So rather than saying this is a knee, I'm going to say this is a rectangle, a triangle, and a kind of slightly elongated trapezium or a slightly stretched rectangle. I just want to think about them as shapes to make it a little bit more easy for my brain to manage. Because when we think about drawing a person, we think, oh my goodness, that's really complicated. And we can actually intimidate ourselves before we even start. So what we'll do now is we'll attempt an envelope construction together. So we're going to use a Blue Jay for this activity. If you're a student who's a little bit more advanced, maybe you've tried something similar to this before, you might like to select a different animal, maybe an animal that might give you a little bit more of a challenge today. So if you would like to follow along with me, feel free to take a screenshot and print this image out, or you can find the URL in the bibliography to access yourself at home. So our first step is going to be to join together our outermost extremities of our subject. So on your printed reference image, you're going to join together all the things that really stick out the furthest. And we're going to basically play dot to dot around the edges of our subject to pocket it in a nice little simple shape. So nowhere should you be dipping in between two things that stick out. So for example, I've joined the tail right to the top of this bird's head, and I've even gone a little bit further so that then I can join it to the beak, rather than going from the tail and then dipping in towards the body and then dipping up towards the head. So let's flick over to my drawing station now, and I'll show you how to get started. All right, so now we're at our drawing station. The very first thing that we're going to do is grab our picture of our Blue Jay, and we're going to be finding the envelope to start with. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pencil, and I'll be doing mine a little bit darker so you can see on the camera. You don't need to though, you can do this quite lightly. What I'm going to be doing is grabbing my pencil, and I'm going to be joining together the outermost extremities of my bird. So that means basically the things which stick out the most. I know it's really hard to see down there in the flowers, so just sort of try as best as you can. And you'll notice that I'm not dipping into the crevices at any point. I'm just playing dot to dot right around the edges. So there's my initial envelope. The other thing that I might want to do at this stage is I'm going to put a little dot or a little mark where my tallest point of my bird is. And I'm also going to put a little mark where the lowest point of my bird is. And so what I will do is I will draw a line, and that line is going to go from the top of the bird to the bottom of the bird in around about the middle. So I'm going to start by guesstimating where I think that middle point between the two widest areas of my bird might be. I think it's probably around about here. And I'm not going to rely on my brain to know that for certain. I'm going to double check. So I will get my skewer, or you can use anything. You can use your pencil, you can use a ruler, you can use some string. I'm going to go 1 and 2, and it's not quite half. Halfway for me is actually going to go around about here. So let's try again. 1, 2, that's looking much better. There is my halfway point. The other thing that I would like to do is through my bird's body, I would like to kind of get a sense of that angle with my pencil. And then I would like to just replicate that angle by making a little bit of a gesture line through the center. And you won't need to go over yours so many times as well. Again, that's just so that you can see my lines as best as you can on the image. And then I'm going to test them, because I'm hoping to find around about halfway now between my tallest and my lowest, my highest and my lowest point.
So 1, 2, that's around about right. Another thing I want to do is see if there's around about an even amount of the bird's body on either side. Or not quite. I might have to move it a little bit further down if I want it to be an even amount of the bird's body on each side. Maybe more like there. Let me now test the bird's body. 1, at least 1 up to the middle line, 2. That's around about the line I want. So I'm going to erase the ones that I don't. And it's really important that I erase anything that I don't want, because if I just leave it, I'll end up with line spaghetti and it will be a little bit confusing. And I'm actually going to grab an even darker pencil than that and mark it in a little bit more clearly for you to be able to see on your screen at home. But remember that you don't have to do that. Nice and light is best. So double check again. Yeah, that's around about halfway. I've got my envelope. And I've gone across and I found my highest most point. So we really want to kind of put our bird in a nice, easy to understand little box. You also will want to do this nice and straight. I'm getting into trouble because I'm kind of drawing a little bit on the side in order to accommodate for my camera here. But when you're doing this at home, you want it up on an easel where you can see it all in one view as best as you can. All right, so now that we've found our envelope on our printout, the next thing we're going to do is start to map our own bird out on our page. And the first choice we'll need to make is going to be about scale. So you can either produce a bird which is the same scale, or you can scale your bird up or down. And one of the reasons I really like this envelope method is because it does allow me a lot of freedom to be able to scale up or down and to manage that really well without finding myself creating inaccuracies. So I'm going to decide the height of my bird by marking the tallest and the lowest point on my page. So I'm not trying to make them similar. If I'm scaling up, I'm going to choose for myself how large I would like that distance to be. Or if I'm scaling down, I can do it as small or as wide as I would like. That one is totally up to you. So then what we're going to do is we're going to use the height that we have now determined, and we're going to compare the sides of our envelope shape. We're going to compare their lengths to that height that we've already decided for the center of our bird. And we're going to compare our lengths of our sides to our height, and we're going to see if it's equivalent to the lengths of the sides compared to the height in our reference image. Now that sounds a little bit confusing when you hear it spoken, but when you see me demonstrate that at my drawing station, you'll be able to understand what it is that I mean. And so this process is called comparative measuring, and it can be done with a knitting needle, a ruler, a skewer, a piece of string, really anything. You can also use your pencil, but sometimes I like to draw at a really big scale, and I find that actually my pencil is a little bit too short, and I also find that it's a little bit thick, and sometimes I want to be able to see a little bit more detail when I'm trying to measure. So let's hop over to my drawing and do that together now. So now that we've considered our scale and you placed your central axis line in, so that's where we found the tallest and the lowest point, and that's what we're going to use to compare everything else. We can also find two other markings which are going to be really important. The second marking we can find, which will be important, will be the two widest points. Now we found its height, let's find its width and check that that will actually fit on our page. And we can also comparatively measure that as well to make sure that it's accurate. We can also place a central line right down the middle of our bird's body. And this is not going to be a perfect line. This is actually going to be a line which is on an angle rather than straight. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to capture the angle that the bird is tilted. And I'm leaving that line in as a bit of like an indication of the attitude of the bird's body. It's like going to be a reminder for me not to start to change the angle of the bird as I draw. So we've talked about the fact
fact that we're going to find that envelope. We're going to find our kind of tallest and lowest and our widest points. And then we're going to put our gesture line through the middle, and we're going to find that envelope around the edge. Let's now flick over to my drawing station, and I'll walk you through how we can do that one bit at a time.
All right, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark these points in on my actual drawing, and I can now choose whether or not I would like to transfer around about exactly, or whether or not I would like to scale up or maybe scale down. So the first thing that I want to do is I would like to decide how tall I would like my version of this bird to be. So I'm going to pop an approximate top and bottom line. And again, this should be very, very, very light. So that's how tall I would like my bird to be. And in fact, actually, I think I'm going to make that just a tiny bit smaller. I'm working with a smallish space here, and I really don't want to run out of room for the head and for the tail. Then I'm going to take my measuring instrument for my comparative measuring. I'm going to measure the tallest height, and remember that's not this slanty line, that's the line we do across from the top of the head. I'm going to pop in a measurement for that line, and I want to now see, still holding that measurement with my finger, how many times it should go in the width from the beak to the tail. So it's going to go 1, and I'm going to put a little landmark to remind myself 1, and just underneath twice into the width. And it's not going to be even on each side, that width. There's going to be more length over there. So I'm going to start by drawing a line first down the middle to create my axis. And again, I'm doing multiple for visibility. You absolutely don't need to do multiple, just one is enough. And we want less rather than more, so that when you are trying to get your highlight areas, they're not tainted by kind of the remnants of you going over and over the top with your construction lines. So again, double checking if I need to. It's going to go into that width 1 and a little bit less than 2 times. Let's have a go. Let's say I put the front of the beak right about here. What would that be? 1. And then around about 2 times would be over here. So now let me check how many times this height is going to go into the width. It's going to go into the width from the very tip of the beak 1 and a little bit less than 2 times. All right, let's see if we can replicate that. So I'm going to kind of guesstimate around about where I would like the tip of my beak to be. I think maybe around about there. And again, I'm testing. I'm going to test this area one more time. So that's the length from the beak to the middle point. And then it should be a little bit extra on the end. So let's do the equivalent of that middle point. A little bit extra on the end is going to be around about there. Now I'm going to test the entire height. 1, 2. How did we go? 1, 2. Should have quite a bit of overhang. 1, 2. And mine does as well. So I'm pretty happy now with that width and that height. And that's the first step right there, done for us, which is pretty exciting that we can already get that far with only a couple of little marks. The next thing that I would like to do is I'm going to start by estimating whereabouts I would like this line at the bottom to stop and start. So I'm going to put the bottom of my line here, and it's going to come up just a little bit, like so. All right, so I'm trying to now get the angle of this bottom line. It's going to come up like so. So I'm testing here and I'm trying to replicate over here. I can also see that this bottom line isn't going to hang very much over the lowest point, right about here. And now what I can do is I can test the length. I'm going to test the length in this case into the height. It's going to go into the height 1, 2 times exactly. Let's see if mine does. 1, 2, oh, not quite. That might be a little bit long. Let me shorten it and have another go. 1. Oh, hang on, we'll try again. 1, 2. So that should be around about the right area for that to be placed now. And that means that I'm going to be able to do this line, which is going to travel to just after the tip of the beak. So I'm testing the angle of that line that I had initially put in. And I'm trying my best to replicate that. And every time I do anything to this picture, I'm playing spot the difference. I'm kind of looking back and forth. I'm flicking my eyes between the picture and mine. And I'm looking for any differences in the angle that I might be able to see. That's looking pretty all right to me. But if it is incorrect, that will quickly become clear very, very shortly. When I start to put in other things, you're going to be able to realize if you've made any mistakes. So next thing I really would like to find out is where this point for the top of the head is going to be. So I'm going to create what's called a plumb line. I'm going to drop this line from the point of the head downwards. And I can see that that should come down to right about just before the bottom of this line. So there's my plumb line. I think it's going to stop around about there. And that's really helpful because I know that that's this line, if I continue it across, that's going to be the absolute tallest height of my bird. And now I can come in like this. And I can create that pointy area for the beak. So using my plumb lines again, I'm going to come across from where this tail is. See if that lines up with anything important that could help me. I can see that that tail lines up with around about here. Oh, let's try that again. That didn't show up. Around about there on my bird. I'm not sure if you can see that on my camera. Let me do that a little bit darker. I wonder how many times that length goes into the line that we've just placed. 1 and a tiny little bit. So let's give it a go. 1. Oh, not quite. Hang on. Let's try again. Should go 1. I measured from here to the top of the head. I forgot that my line, it actually goes to the point of his head, all the way up here. And in fact, this line should actually come just to above the point of the head because we see we have the top of this triangle sits above. So let me now grab that measurement. Okay, so it's actually going to be substantially less than one of these, probably up to around about here. So I'm going to put another little landmark in. Let me see if there's anything else around and about that I can test this against. So I've got this line. How many times is that going to go into from here to here? 1 and about 3/4. Let's see if it does. 1 and ooh, not quite. Something's gone awry. Let me check one more time. That's 1 length. Then it's going to go 1. Yeah, and 3/4. 1 length. All right. 1, 3/4. That seems like it is approximately right. I've moved it just a tiny little bit lower. And now I'm going to bring this line nice and even the whole way across to my widest point. I'm being careful not to slope it down, which can definitely happen depending on the angle that you're drawing. And then I need to clean up my line spaghetti because I've been doing some adjusting and now my lines are a little bit all over the place. There I go. And I know that if the end of the tail sits around about here, then that's going to help me now to join the very top of the head to the tail. Now I can find that measurement. That is feeling to me around about correct. Once I found that measurement, nice and easy, I can come on down here like this. And I found that other side of my basic envelope of my bird. I can also then see that the central point line that I placed to get the gesture, to get the angle, is going to sit just above here. So I'm going to eyeball that. I'm going to try my luck and see how I go. And it's going to come down to, again, if I eyeball around about there, I'm going to try and pop it in and see if my measurements tell me I'm correct. So anytime I test something out by like guesstimating, I'm always going to double check. Remember though that if this sort of measuring is not your personal style, that's not how you like to create art, that's totally fine. This is all a matter of personal preference, all right? It's all just about how you prefer to create an image and what makes you feel most comfortable. All right, so I've got that line in. Let me take a look. Let me double check. So that line should stop. Oh, exactly halfway does mine. It's already not looking like it. No, it does not. Halfway is going to be more like around about there. So I need to move it up quite a little bit. Let's check again. Is that better? 1, 2, that's much better. Right, it's actually going to come down to around about there. And at this point in time, you're really not committed to any of these lines, okay? You haven't married them. You have not decided that that's your line. Sorry. You've not decided that that's your line and now you're not allowed to move it. We're totally flexible still. If something's not quite right, we're going to fix it rather than just sort of decide that it must be correct because it's the one that we first put down. And again, I'm tidying up what I don't need. For me, that also means all of these unnecessary times I've gone over. See if you can get into the habit of doing just one line for each construction line. You'll also notice that when I construct, sometimes I will try and do it in one swoop. And the way that I do that is by holding my pencil in the center. And sometimes I use my pinky as the support. And you see how now I have the ability to make some really nice straight and diagonal lines. It's going to be much more tidy. But some people are messy constructors, some people are neat constructors, and that's okay. Right, so now at around about this point, I really want to find some of these other big shapes that I'm going to need to pop in. In fact, one of the big shapes I can already see is going to be this one. Let me just grab my pencil. It's going to be this shape right here. I'm going to try and carve out the negative space. I want to create this sort of trapezium shape. Hoping everyone can see that trapezium set shape. So when I use negative space, the bird becomes my positive space, and the negative space then becomes anything inside my envelope area that isn't bird. If my bird is the right shape, my negative space will also be the right shape. And that's a sneaky way that I can tell. So I want to first decide how far down I would like for this shape to go. I think I'm just eyeballing it. I think it's going to sit around about there, but I will double check that measurement in just a moment. I think that it's going to stop around about there. That's a very short distance. I'm going to try my luck and see if I get that one right. And it's going to join to the shape of the top of the head. All right, so now we're about to find this trapezium shape right here so that we can establish where our positive space of our bird and our negative space of our background inside of our envelope is going to be located. And we had found approximately where we think it's going to start and end, and we placed a mark around about how far down we think that trapezium is going to reach. What we're going to stop and do, though, for a second before we go ahead with that process is we're going to just stop and make sure that we're checking back and forth, flicking our eyes back and forth from a nice distance or from directly above, not from an angle, to see whether or not there's anything which is at the moment not quite right. So for me, at the moment, I'm feeling that this point of the top of my bird's head is extending a little bit too far above my highest most point line that I had placed in. So I'm going to actually take that down a little bit, just like that. And I know that that seems like a very, very little thing, but little things like that can throw off other larger relationships in our drawing. And also in flicking my eyes back and forth, I can see that I think this angle here might be a little bit more extreme than the angle that they have here. Theirs is going to be a little bit more straight. Ours is more of an angle. We could think about kind of like a compass point if we want to. Here's my compass. I've got north, south, east, and west. And if I was to try and create that exact angle, I feel like it would be kind of in between south and west at around about this point. So that's what I'm going to pretend that I'm doing. And that's going to help me to see that it actually needs to come down. Probably a little bit more like that. But I want to be careful because I don't want to extend that line. So once I've made this adjustment, it's going to be really important for me to double check my measurements one more time. To me, that's seeming like it comes more down like this. And that you'll notice that I'm being very, very picky. And the reason is because the more picky you are at around about this stage, the better the realism will be that you'll be able to create. So I'm feeling like that is a better size that I'm looking for. Now what I want to do is just remeasure that base and make sure that I'm happy. So that base should go into this top line, 1, 2, and around about a half. Let's take a look and see if ours does. 1, 2, and around about a half. Yes, it does. So there must have been something not quite right about the size of my base beforehand. And one of the ways that I'm checking to see whether there might be things in my composition that are amiss is not only by flicking back and forth, but by looking again at this entire section. What shape is this entire section? What shape is this entire section? And does mine feel correct right at this moment? So another thing that feels incorrect right now about my shape is the distance between here and where my line starts. I feel that this area should feel a little bit taller than mine, and this area should feel a little bit smaller than how mine currently feels. I feel that that is probably more accurate. Around about there. So let me try out my new line and see if I prefer that instead. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to adjust anything else that I'm noticing at this stage. So we're going to fast forward through that process rather than you watching me do all of my adjustments. And you might like to pause and take a second as well yourself to make sure that you are feeling 100% happy with all of the different relationships that you can currently see in these 4 quadrants of your drawing. So as I've been correcting, one thing that I've actually discovered is that what we thought was halfway between the widest point when we first began this artwork is actually not quite correct. So I'm gonna actually need to move it over just a tiny little bit. And it will end up quite conveniently lining up with where our back leg will need to be. So let me double check that new measurement from the edge of the beak right then to the tip of the tail. Let's see how we go. Or from the edge of the envelope around the beak. Oh, not quite. It actually still needs to shuffle over more. We had that one quite off. And that's really normal for that to happen because we're only human beings. Even your tutors, everyone, we're only human beings. We're all going to make mistakes. And so we have to be extra vigilant to make sure that we catch those mistakes early on in our drawing process, where possible, to prevent ourselves from having a more difficult time with our proportion. That's looking to be more in line with the center. So even at this point, even more major things, I can totally still move around until I know that I have found what I'm looking for. And the reason we need that center point, or the reason I would like that center point, is because it's going to actually really assist me once I saw where that new center point was. I could see that it will really assist me with finding the area where my back leg actually starts. If it was off and there's a little bit of overhang and I discovered that, what I could actually do, if that wasn't going to be a more helpful measurement for me to have instead, is I could actually just keep drawing, but with the little bit of overhang in mind when I'm measuring the rest of my proportions. All right, so now I've taken a minute to correct anything that's gone wrong. I am back in a place where I feel really comfortable and confident to find this trapezium shape of negative space. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be deciding how far into this section this shape is going to travel before it stops. I need to find that point right there. So I'm going to measure it here in comparison to this area right here. And it is actually around about the same length. It's just a little bit shorter than up here. If I measure here on mine, should be just a little bit shorter, maybe around about that much. I'm going to put a little landmark to remind myself. And I'm going to have a go at just bringing down that line from my bird's head. What I can also do is just continue this line across. And it should line up almost with this point. It should be a little bit taller than the point of the beak. And again, anytime I'm doing this, I'm also checking for anything that might be not quite correct. And in my case, I can see that it should be a narrower area, ever so slightly, right in here. There must have been something about that angle that was a little bit off. So I'm always checking the relationships between different elements on the page to see if I can spot mistakes before it's more difficult for me to be able to fix them. You also absolutely do not need to be quite as meticulous as this. I'm really taking this bird to the extreme today to show you just how much you can consider proportion when you're doing this, if you would like to. But again, if you have more of a loose style, or if you're not so worried about this bird looking exactly identical, you may not have to go to the same lengths as me. All right. Now I want to check the height of this triangle. I'm going to check it into here. It should have quite a bit of overhang. Let me see on mine. Mine does as well. Excellent. Now I really want to find out how much space I should have here before it's going to join to that tail on this side. So that is going to go into this side of the bird's head 1 with a little bit of overhang. So let me double check. 1,
with a little bit of overhang. Looks like around about that. I'm going to put myself a little landmark. I'm going to continue down in that direction, and then I'm going to join it to the tail. And then as I'm looking over, I'm just asking myself, does this look similar enough? Am I happy with the match that I can currently see that I've got? If not, I can always still adjust. But for me, I think I'm feeling quite happy with that. So now we can move on to the next large shape and the next kind of area to carve out of our bird. And I think that next area is going to be straight down from the beak. We can go down like this. And then we can also come in like this and find the bottom of our bird. And now is the fun part, because now is when we start to build momentum. We start to put the main big shapes in, and then we can build into the smaller shapes within those. And the more we build into the smaller shapes, the more this is going to start to look like our bird. So I'm going to just come and take a look and see where I need to put this line. Where does it begin? It should go into the head 1, 2 times exactly. So if I start by trying to guesstimate it, I would guesstimate that it's going to be around about there. Let's take a look. 1, 2 times, lucky guess. So now what I can do is I can come down. Like that. And that's not going to be perfectly parallel like I placed it. It's going to get narrower towards the bottom. So I'm going to adjust mine so that it will feel the same way. And it is very, very normal for this to take quite a long time before you get it right when you're still just learning how to do this. All right, and now I need to find out how far down my line, my central axis, how far down that central axis this line is going to stop. And I will need to find something to compare it to. So I'm going to compare it to the top of the head. Let's take a look. It's going to have a little bit of overhang compared to their head. I'm going to put in a little landmark around about where I think it needs to stop. Let me double check. And yes, I'm feeling fairly okay with that. Now I need to find out where it's going to stop over here on this side. That is going to go into this triangle a little bit under 1 time. So kind of around about there. No, I didn't quite work with my landmark, but I can remember where around about it was. Let me double check again. Yeah, that's feeling all right. So now I'm going to go ahead and join that up there. And I'm also feeling pretty all right about that match as well. At this stage, you're probably accumulating quite a few lines again. So let's erase some more lines that might not be so necessary anymore. Those lines are going to include now this outskirt area right here.
So just over there. Feeling comfortable taking that away on mine as well. And what other lines can I now remove? I think I'm going to leave majority of the rest in for the moment, just in case I still would like to use them to check on anything. I'm also just flicking my eyes back and forth yet again, checking for anything else I may have missed. All right, so this line actually stops right underneath the little fluffy area of the bird's leg. I would now like to create a triangle that's going to come and carve out the top of that little leg area right there. So that is quite a small little triangle. I'm going to see if I can eyeball that triangle. That's feeling like a pretty all right amount of space to me right there. And I would like to now find out also where it's going to start to turn into just tail feathers right here. So I want to find that area. Let me measure how far along that's going to happen. Should go a little bit over halfway. I can also take a look at this area right here, and I can also think about trying to make that triangle of negative space when I'm trying to find it on my own. And now let me also double check. Should be a fair bit over from halfway, but mine might actually be a little bit too far over by the looks of it. I might need to scoot mine back, perhaps just a little bit. Let's see how we feel about that. 1, 2. And I'm actually wondering now if my distance here is too large. I'm going to double check that while I'm here. That should go in 1, 2, 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Yep, that should be right. But then I have a new helpful measurement I can use. 1, 2, and that line right there is going to be just behind that 2 mark. Let me find that on mine. Number 2. It is. It's going to be actually closer to that first line that I placed by the looks of it. Looks like I should have trusted myself the first time, but I'm really glad that I've measured it, because now I know that it's not going to be a problem later, even if it turns out that I was correct. Now I'm feeling a little bit more happy with those shapes. And now I can go ahead and join it up. It's going to stop kind of just down from this line here. So I've got my 2 landmarks. I'm going to go ahead and join that together. And now look at our bird taking shape. How cool is that? And then when I get to this part of my tail feather right here, it's going to be an almost straight line. My angle is going to change. Kind of like that. And again, I'm using that negative space, always, always, to see if I'm correct. I can then make a little point on the end if I'd like. And I know that I put this line slightly above that tail.
So I'm going to kind of straighten that out now as well. And I'm going to stop and kind of see how I'm feeling about how it's looking at the moment. Is there anything right now that's not quite adding up? The next thing I would like to do is find this little triangle for the tummy right here. I'm going to go ahead and carve out that tiny little negative space triangle right there. And if I want to, I can measure that, but I'm feeling quite happy eyeballing that one. I don't mind quite as much if that one's not exactly perfect, but I definitely want it to have a very, very similar feeling. I want it to be close enough. Once I found that line, I know that just above, I'm going to have this line here for the black markings. So I'm going to pop up one little bit, round about that much. And I want to stop that line right about here to make that triangle of negative space over there. And I can actually see that this isn't a perfectly straight line. This is going to be a curved line. So for now, I'm going to put it in as a straight line, or maybe as two straight lines like that, with the knowledge that I can definitely give it more of a curve later on. And even at this stage, try and keep it lighter than mine. When you're doing this for yourself, you'll be able to see really, really clearly, even faint little lines if you're working with good lighting. And so you're definitely wanting to avoid little smudges of pencil and things of that nature that I'll be starting to get all around my work. You'll also notice that I'm carefully brushing off these little eraser particles. Be really careful because the skin on your hands have oil, and if that oil gets trapped in the page with little bits of graphite, it will make these little permanent or semi-permanent stains. So if you're finding that you're having trouble with that, you may want to actually get a nice soft paintbrush and use that to brush away the remnants of the eraser rather than using your hand. All right, the next thing that I would like to do is I would like to now find the front leg. So I'm going to create a triangle. It's going to chop quite neatly through there, which is very helpful little measurement for me. There he is there. And now I also know that I can come in and make this little triangle shape of that other area where there's that little chunky bit of the top of the leg where there's fluff. And then for this back leg down here, I can also now come down like so and make that little triangle of negative space in there. So I'm going to come in like that. So now I'm feeling confident with my basic big shapes. There's quite a bit that I can now erase. So I'm going to get rid of quite a number of these external construction lines. In particular, I'm feeling comfortable getting rid of majority of my outside envelope. All right, so this is what I should now be left with. And what I want to do now is that next internal layer of detail. So I'm going to now find this wing area. I'm going to find this triangle right here to create that. And then I can extend it actually down to about here. And that'll create this bottom area. Then I should be able to slice through the top like that. And then I should also be able to come in like that to create that other detail right there of that wing. And I'm paying attention to that little triangle of negative space. If he's not right, I know my wing isn't quite right. And I can always check my negative space in here as well to see whether or not I feel that I am correct. The next thing I can do is I can come from around about here and I can travel straight across until I'm feeling fairly happy with that triangle shape also. Then I'm going to put a little mark. I want to check that there looks like there's a round about the correct size over here and also a round about the correct size over here. So I know that over here there should be a little bit more space. And that should then allow me to also go ahead and create this shape here. And I can see that that's not correct. Mine has too much of a gap here. Should come into about there. So I can go ahead and adjust that also. And then it's possible that that might be feeling actually a little bit too pointy in here. Let me see if I can find somewhere in the middle where I'm happy with those shapes. So as I do this, I'm still flicking my eye back and forth, and I'm still checking both my positive and my negative space to decide whether or not I'm comfortable with that final result. And I can also still always fall back on my measuring at this point. I'm feeling pretty all right though with where that wing is sitting right now. I also know that this is where the tail is going to join to the body, so I can put a little triangle right about there to indicate that. And now I would like to find more of my beak shape. And so in order to do that, I am going to start by chopping straight through here, like so. And again, I'm paying attention to where is the space here and here. How much should there be? Once I find a marker I'm around about happy, I can place a point. If I'm not feeling so certain about it, I can measure again. Should be kind of along this bottom marking under the eye. Because then what we can do is we can come in and find this little triangle of negative space, and we can put the line in for the top of the beak. So I'm going to find my little triangle. I'm going to find my line for the top of the beak like that. I can also then swoop down the tip of the nose. Kind of already got that happening. And then I can see pretty clearly where that joins right there, which is helpful. The next line I can find is this one right here. It's going to go right about there. And at this point, I also want to be looking at the negative space in here. And right now for me, mine is looking a little bit wide. So I'm actually going to sneak in my shapes just a little bit more. The next shape I can find is going to be this line right here, and I'm making a box where that eyeball is going to sit. So that line there is going to line up with eventually the top of the marking here, but for now what I can do is I can use this tiny triangle of negative space and this shape right here to make sure that I'm happy with where that's placed. I know that this section in here is going to be black. I'm going to kind of mark that off. So I also know that I'm going to have a thick black marking here, so I'm marking off that area as well.
So I'm imagining a line here and also a line right here. Should leave a space like that right in the middle. And then I can go ahead. That's such a small area. I'm going to try my best to eyeball it. I'm going to decide where I would like this eye. And I'm actually going to put my eye in kind of like a little square for now. It really is going to be a little robot bird. And that eye is going to take up a fair amount of that internal space in there. And then I'm going to think about the angle of that downwards marking right there.
All right, so now that we've got the basic shape of our envelope and we've also mapped in the biggest shapes of our bird's construction using those comparative measuring tools, what we can do is start to find smaller details inside of our big details. We're kind of starting from a big picture and then we're zooming right in over time. And so what I tend to do is carve these little details out still wherever it's possible using my diagonal lines. So I construct in a way which is a little bit more boxy. Some artists go in straight with curves, and I will show you in another video how we can approach that process. But for today, do try and keep those lines quite boxy. And then what we can do is we can use diagonals to actually create the shape or the character of our curve. So rather than going straight in with a curve, I'm going to build my curve using the diagonals, and then that gives me a guide to come and soften that curve after the fact. And so that's the process which I'll now undergo with my bird. I've got the boxy structure. Now I'm going to come in, find the small details, and find any missing curves that I may need to soften. So not only are we going to try and soften the curves and find our small details, but you can also stand back from your work. You can flick your eyes back and forth. You can triple check your measurements. We're really looking to refine our level of accuracy at this stage.
And now what I can do is I can erase all of my construction lines now on my reference picture. I really want to be able to see my bird in all his glory, so that I can come in and add any details which may have been lost. You know, sometimes they get covered up by our construction lines themselves. We definitely don't want that. We want to get all of his interesting texture and all his little curvy bits. If you've still got quite a lot of markings on your reference picture after doing this, it might now be time to pull up that reference picture on a separate page or on an electronic device, so that now you can see more of that subtlety in your bird. So now that I'm at around about this point, it's really now time for me to fix my shapes, because my bird is quite a robot bird at the present time. He's looking a little bit stiff. And all of your drawings, if you construct using your karate chopping diagonal lines, rather than using kind of circles or ellipses, are going to have that robotic feeling when you begin. And so it's really important that you remember to come back in and to compensate for that. Otherwise, your drawing will remain a little bit too stiff. So I'm going to get rid of some extra lines in here that I no longer need. I can also see that in putting that triangle for the tallest point, I actually missed the way that the head needs to swoop in this direction. That is on a bit of a lean, but it's almost a straight line what we see happening there. So I'm going to pop in that curve. When you draw curves, if you're having trouble getting the curve correct, you can use your diagonal lines like this and then come inside and create that curve within, if it's a very specific curve you're trying to create. But you don't necessarily need to anymore. I'm going to be careful not to make my bird taller though, in adding that little bit of feathers up the top. And what you will notice is that there are little marks all over my paper. So again, just goes to show the importance of keeping it quite light when you're beginning. Give this a little bit more of a dip. in here, this section. And I can also make this dark area a little bit more of a curve.
All right, now that we have found our smaller details, it's time for us to refine even a little bit further still. So we're going to want to erase any unwanted construction lines and again, continue to round off any sharp or boxy unwanted edges that we might have accidentally neglected. When we construct using primarily diagonal lines, you will sometimes find that things do feel a little bit more stiff and robotic. And the trick is that you really do need to remember to come back in and to soften things, to give things a bit more flow and a bit more character. If you don't, your drawings will continue to be very stiff. And we really want to save very stiff drawings for architecture and for things of that nature. We don't want things which are organic to necessarily feel quite so rigid all the time. And also, I would love for you to start to think about maybe some ways to integrate your personal style at around about this point. That could mean that maybe you want to deliberately exaggerate the feathers on the head. Maybe you would like to add some extra details that aren't actually there in the original picture. Maybe you want to soften or warp or add some expressive marks or map where some expressive marks might go later. You'll also at about this stage probably want to get a fresh copy of your reference image or erase the pencil markings on your reference image as well. Because sometimes when we put in our scaffolding, when we're mapping in all those construction lines, it can actually cover subtle details to do with the edges of shapes. And we really want to see hard and soft edges and that information so that we're able to prepare ourselves for when we're later going to go in with more tonal work and more subtlety.
I want to really pay attention to how the bird's breast area, or like underneath of the beak area, is going to kind of puff out. And for this section, you may also want to have both a kneadable and a hard eraser. That kneadable eraser is going to be really fantastic for squishing into a point to get those tiny little areas. And you may also want to start to create a little bit of a feeling of some texture. So I'm going to break my line where his little fluffy bit of the top of his head is going to be. I want to curve my line down and join that to the beak. So we're really trying to spy as much of that small detail now that we might be missing as possible. Keep in mind that your kneadable eraser may be a little bit more gentle in the way that it's going to lift off the page than your hard eraser. This is also an opportunity if you can see anything tonally that you think might be really important to map. Like for me, I've decided that lighter bit on the top of the beak is going to be important to map. I'm going to go ahead and do that now while I see it. I also want to get that dark marking on the bottom of the beak right there. All right, I know for certain that I'm going to need to smooth out his tummy. You'll notice that I'm erasing the join between my front leg, but leaving it for my back leg. And I also want to put in the basic shape, maybe of that shadow on the back leg while I'm here. You can either shadow shape as you go, or you can kind of smooth everything right out and then treat shadow shaping as a process of its own in the next layer. I can come in now and make his little eye round. You'll notice that when I was constructing, I didn't put the eye in until much later in the process. And the reason for that is because the moment we put an eye on something, it stops being a set of basic big shapes and it starts being a bird or a person, even if you were doing a portrait. And sometimes that can suddenly mean that we stop seeing certain things because we think, oh, I know what a bird looks like. Or it can also make it feel a little bit intimidating sometimes as well. It can make it feel like more pressure.
All right, so once you have your construction of your bird, once you're feeling fairly pleased with it, we're going to then spot the difference again. So you're going to place your reference picture and your drawing side by side, just like I have on this slide here. And you're going to flick your eyes back and forth because all of us will make human errors, even if you were meticulous in the way that you measured. Chances are something will be not exactly perfect because you're not a photocopier. And so what you're going to do is try your best where you do see inaccuracies at this stage to go in and change what you're able to change. So I wonder if anyone can spot the inaccuracies in my drawing, even though I measured. There's definitely still some room for improvement. If you spot something which could be improved in my demo drawing here, make sure to drop it in the comment, or maybe you can find me in the studio and let me know what you think it might be, and I'll tell you whether or not you're right. You can also make the artistic choice, if you do spot an error, to actually leave it. So you might decide once you spot a problem, yes, that's a fix which I'm happy to make, that's nice and easy, or that will really improve my drawing. Maybe even if it's major, it could be worth doing. Or you might see something and think, that's quite a major change, and actually, even though it's not looking exactly the same as this bird, even if maybe it looks a bit more like his cousin because of this error that I've made, I can make the creative decision to actually leave that if it's not bothering me. So it'll need to be up to you how much you really care about accuracy and how detailed you would like to be in your measuring and in your corrections.
And I can still, at this point in time, if and when I feel like I need to, I can still use measuring. I'm still all the time thinking about my negative and positive space in order to try and get the best results that I possibly can of these smaller details as well, and of curving everything out. And there is a little bit more skill involved in this step in terms of constant observation. So I'm constantly flicking my eyes back and forth and playing spot the difference here so that I can have confidence that I'm headed in the right direction to achieve the accuracy that I'm looking for. On top of the tail as well, I can see there's a little area right here where the feathers actually lay on top. So I'm going to be mapping that in. And I can also see a second kind of triangular shaped darker shadow before it reaches that little white section there. And he's going to have a little dark tip on his tail. See, the feather's going to puff out a little bit here. So again, really important, that was a straight line, even though it still is feeling like quite a straight-ish line. It's definitely broken by some softer areas. It's going to be very important that I get those softer areas in if I really want it to feel like a bird now, rather than very, very stiff. Here, that's going to be a little dark feather there. This is actually going to trail off then in quite a soft way right here. It's going to go very, very soft. I can also see that at around about here, I'm going to have a little bit of a transition into another tone. I can see that these are going to kind of feel like they join here. It's kind of trails into the next thing. then I'm actually going to have a little bump. This wing area, I can start to put in any little markings that I can see. You can see this little triangle area here. I can see this area of darker striped feathers. Then it's going to have a little bit of a lighter strip that goes there. It's going to have another more dark feeling layer. And then this line is going to be there, but it's going to be a lot softer and a lot more organic, a lot less stiff. There I go. I can't really see the feet, they're hidden by flowers. So the next thing I would do is start to come in and create my branch in here. And I would start to build some kind of floral masses and shapes all around the feet back there. And that would be how I would finish my construction of a bird. So now that I've finished my construction of a bird, I can think about some more shadow shaping, get some more of that detail in. I can also begin very carefully laying in some base tones once I've got my shadow shaping done. I can also take a minute if I'd like to and just actually double check all my details, spend some more time, again, flicking my eyes back and forth to make sure that this is the best possible result that I can achieve. If you do this yourself at home, or if you do the same process but to a different animal, definitely remember to take a photograph and show your classroom tutor for some feedback. So if you would like to continue to practice this at home, there's some great ways to do that. First thing that you can do is actually find more envelopes. So you could print out a variety of images and you can actually just practice drawing that envelope with a marker on top of the printouts. You might want to do a whole bunch of these before you ever actually try and practice drawing these. And my goal is for you to hopefully be walking through the world and going, oh my goodness, I can see how I would use an envelope to draw that, when you're just looking around at random things. And the next way that you can improve is just to practice. So once you've done this, select a couple of your favorite envelopes on the printouts that you've used in activity 1 and see if you can follow these through to be completed drawings. The more of these you can do, the faster you'll become at completing this process and the easier that you'll find it is to do this. Here are our image and research references for today. If you would like to follow any of those up, there's some really great resources in there. And the long-term goal is to build speed through practice and to notice envelopes and big shapes in everything that you see. Also remember that this is a starting point. There's definitely other ways that we can approach construction. We can go further than this. We can abandon this and try a completely different process altogether. So if this method wasn't for you, that is absolutely okay. Really what we would like for you to do is find the process that's going to work best for you in your personal practice. And as always, thank you so much for your time, and I'm wishing you happy art making. See you next time.